And then, I wait for it to the picture. There we go. All right. Good evening, Littleton. Welcome to our first Charter Committee meeting that the Select Board is charged with we put together a list of items that the committee will be working on for the next 15 to 18 months. There's 9 members. We'll probably do introductions. I'm Gary Wilson. I'm with the Littleton Select Board. I'm going to be the liaison with the committee. I won't be sitting up here once the group organizes, and we'll have a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk, excuse me. That's right, we need a clerk. And from then on, it'll be just run by the group, and the Collins Center will be here as well in different forms. We will be doing a lot of this through Zoom as well. We have a member right now, Kevin, is on through Zoom, and I believe some other members of the Collins Center will be coming in through Zoom. So try to keep it as fluid as possible for people that can't participate in person all the time. But I do want to go over the agenda really quick, just so we understand what's going to be happening tonight. I don't expect a long meeting. This will be basically the kickoff meeting to get it organized and discuss some of the processes and things like that. So we use the call to order. We'll have the Charter Committee member introductions. We'll go around the room. Charter Committee organization, that's where we'll appoint the members. The Collins Center manager will have introductions, and then we'll discuss review of the meeting format and the meeting schedule. This is really the admin meeting to get things rolling, and then we'll get into the work. So before we get started, I just wanted to personally thank all of you from the Select Board, from all of us to you, and the town for that matter. This is a very important undertaking. I think the Select Board recognized that it was time. Littleton's kind of at a growth point. It's been many years since we had anything that even looked like this. This is the first discussion about a charter committee that potentially could change some of the way that Littleton operates its government in different forms and things like that. And it's also, we're hoping, will create efficiencies and things like that as well. So without further ado, we'll get this started. I'd like to go around the room and introduce everybody, or have everybody introduce themselves.
Okay. Rob Brown's been here since 2021.
Thank you, Rob. That works.
Joe Knox, longtime resident, and actually, 20 years ago, I was on the Town Government Study Committee.
Great.
Going through this for a second time.
Hi everyone, Charlotte Dolens. I moved here with my family in 2020.
Great.
Karen McCloskey, we've been here since 1997.
I'm Tim Goddard. I'm the town moderator and also a member of this committee.
Great.
Betsy Bowling, been involved in town in different things. We moved here in 1993. First time we were the newcomers then. I don't feel like a newcomer anymore.
Alan McRae, I also been involved quite heavily with the town. We moved here in, good Lord, 76. But I'm still not a townie.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm Kyle Bupp. I moved here with my family in 2023.
Kevin?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Brogan. I've lived in the town of Littleton since 2018 and have had the pleasure of serving on the Personnel Advisory Committee for about 3 years now, and looking forward to joining you in this endeavor.
Thank you. And Michael, give your introduction as well. You're going to be such an integral part of this. So.
Sure. Well, thank you. Let me first introduce Anthony Wilson, who's on the screen. Anthony is the project manager for the Collins Center. Okay. He can introduce himself, and then I'll go after him.
Sure.
Thank you.
Anthony?
Thank you. My name is Anthony Wilson. I am the team lead for the Collins Center Charter team. Obviously, I'm joined by Mel, who will introduce himself in a moment. Just a little bit on my background. Prior to serving here at the Collins Center, I was a city clerk in the city of Cambridge, city clerk in the city of Springfield, and municipal lawyer for several years before that. So it's nice to meet you all. I apologize for not being able to be there in person due to some personal issues, but I'll turn it over to Mel.
Thank you, Anthony, and good evening, everyone. My name is Mel Kleckner, and I've been with the Collins Center for 2 years, but prior to that, I was a town administrator or town manager, like Jim, for about 40 years. And I've worked in a lot of different, all in Massachusetts, I've worked in a lot of different forms of government. So I have a lot of good hands-on experience about how government is organized, and we're really looking forward to supporting your committee and the town of Littleton this year.
All right. We can talk about organization really quick, but something that I did want to mention, everybody will probably is familiar with the charge. So if you ever get lost, kind of reel yourselves back in on what the focus should be, because you're doing this, and I know the gentleman from the Collins Center will keep you guys kind of focused as possible, but you'll have enough people in town and things that are going to pull you different directions. Hey, do you think of this? Do you have great idea? All these great ideas? Well, just remember, try to focus it back in on what we're trying to do. Those, even though it might be something that might be in line with this, but you've got enough work ahead of you, so try to keep that as focused as possible on these bullet items that we discussed.
Gary?
Sure.
Just a note for everyone, the acoustics in this place is horrible.
Yep.
I can barely hear you across there. So everybody sort of speak up, okay?
Yeah.
These microphones go to the tape, but they don't amplify
The room.
for the room, so.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's not the Capitol, so that it has all the perfect vocals. So, just real quick, I'm going to read these bullets because it's important, then we'll get into the rest of the meeting, and I'll hand it off and we'll do the reorganization. Just keeping in mind that as we look at the areas of discussion that you're going to be including, and not necessarily limited to, because sometimes these will grow into something else. And that's when I want you to reach back, discuss with the Collins Center, and reach back to the select board on, this is kind of going this way. Is it something we'd like to also look into in the charge? So consideration of shifting from a town administrator to a town manager form of leadership. Obviously, that's something that put a lot of work into a lot of towns. I don't know what the percentages is. The Collins Center probably has a better idea of what that looks like in Massachusetts. The type of town meeting, do we want it to continue to be open, or do we want to go to a representative form? Selection of town boards and committee members, which should be elected, which should be appointed, and by who? A lot of changes in town. A lot of different committees have changed how they're charged and how that what their function is. They went from enterprise, where they raised their own money and ran their own things. We'll use Park and Rec as an example. We have a few committees like that. Now, they're under the town's budget, and they're a little bit more, we're a little bit more involved with all those committees. So we have to, it's time to look at, do we need to restructure how those committees and boards are? And we have a lot of redundancy probably, we'll probably find. When you've been a town for a couple hundred years, you're bound to have some inefficiencies and redundancy. Selection of town hall personnel. You never think about it, but which ones are elected, which are appointed, but what I just mentioned. So it's a lot with the town administrator and the select board and the different committees. Who does the appointing? Who appoints all the people that work in the town of Littleton? So that's something we want to look at. The size of the boards and committees, the length and staggering of terms, which positions cannot be held by the same person, things like that. And there is a lot of governing Massachusetts statute that governs that, but there's also a lot that it doesn't. So give us some good ideas there. Division of authorities between the town manager or town administrator and the select board. This is always one of those things that are a little bit back and forth on where we draw the line. So it's going to be an important thing going forward as we grow. Budgeting and finance process, critical to the survival of our community. We have a process in place, but there's always room. We say it every year, always room for improvement when working through the budgets. And it's changed over the years, but I think there's still room for growth. So hopefully we get a lot of good input there. Consideration of new provisions such as referendums, recalls, and periodic reviews of government structure. So these are things that you guys can look at and decide if that's something that's needed. What structures should be in the charter requires legislator, some of it might require legislation to change. We'd have to actually look to the state to change some of these things and petition that, versus bylaws that we'll have to bring in from of our local government and have the town vote on. That's probably what a lot of this potentially will be. Some we could do in-house, but the majority of this, what comes out of this, if the select board decides to take pieces of this, what you come up with, or all of it, it's going to have to go in front of town meeting, it's going to have to survive that. So, and that's kind of the end result, and it's, so this little paper, even though it's only a page and a half, there's a lot of information in there that I think kind of gets you kicked off, and we've got the gentleman, like I said, from the Collins Center that'll carry this, help you guys along the way. And I'm always here, and Mark will, is that Mark? That's me, okay. Mark will also be in the room when I can't be, just to help liaison any questions, to kind of maybe select any information from the select board. But you can always reach directly out to us as well, and we'll get you whatever you need, so. And you also have Jim that'll be here on occasion as well. You're available.
Oh, I'm available.
You can walk in his office anytime.
Absolutely.
All right, saying that, let's discuss the makeup of the board, and who would like, well, how this works. We're looking for a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. Responsibilities as the chair, I know that a few people in here have been on committees or been chairs of boards before, so that varies depending on the board. I would think, Anthony, can you kind of walk us through what a chairman, a vice chair, and a clerk kind of does in this, for something with the charter committee, how that looks and what their responsibilities are?
Sure. Mel, feel free to chime in. But as you said, it definitely varies by committee to committee, depending on what the role is. I think what we traditionally see is that the chair is the person who sort of runs the meeting, manages who speaks, when, and for how long. Again, there's a lot of flexibility there. I think a lot of people sometimes think that it's very rigid, that you get a certain amount of time, but really just allowing for a free flow of discussion at the meeting. In a committee like this, the way things usually work is that we usually have an extra meeting with the chair and perhaps the vice chair in between the meetings to help think about what items should be on the agenda for the next meeting and kind of discuss how the previous meeting went, so that we're always moving in a positive direction. And then the clerk, it's always sort of, I think, one of the more challenging positions, because you're charged with sort of taking the notes of the meeting and keeping the minutes. I think I heard that this committee may be utilizing some AI tools to help take the minutes, so that might make it easier. But primarily the clerk is taking the minutes and then distributing them at the following or whatever meeting that they come up on to be approved by the body. I probably missed some things. Mel, feel free to fill in the gaps that I may have glossed over.
No, I think the chair will have to coordinate with some staff that the town administrator's office identifies, because you want to make sure you're in compliance with the open meeting law. This meeting has to be noticed 48 hours in advance and so on. So there's a little bit of a coordination administratively, and typically the clerk or the chair might take that on.
Yeah, and the clerk, lastly, usually is the ones that read motions. That's the, one of the other, doesn't have to, but that's typically the clerk will read the motion.
You have motions in this kind of a committee?
You could, if you're trying to get to a vote on something,
Okay.
just to make sure that you need a 5-4 if you want something to move forward, right?
Okay.
So yeah, the majority type votes when you have things like that. So I guess the first order of business, we have anyone that wants to take on the role of chair, or I guess that's how we want to look at it. Is somebody interested in being the chair? Does somebody want to nominate someone for the chair? I don't know if there's any side discussions that people have expressed interest.
I nominate Betsy Bowling as chair.
Okay, we have a nomination. Do we have anyone else interested, or?
I'll second that.
Oh, you're okay.
I thought you were going to say, I volunteer too.
Okay. We have a motion, and we have a second for Betsy. All those in
Okay.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so we have a chair. Congratulations.
Thank you, Betsy.
You will be sitting here, so I'll move aside as soon as we get the reorganization. of the
Sorry,
board.
because you're a hybrid meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Roll call vote.
Pardon. Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor for nominating Betsy Bowling for the chair of the committee, and we have a second from Tim. So we are going to have to do a roll call vote. I apologize because we are at a Zoom meeting, we have a member. So we will go around the room. This happens a lot with these meetings. So Kevin?
Aye.
Aye. Move right around.
Rob, aye.
Joe, aye.
Charlotte, I.
Karen, I.
Tim, aye.
Alan, aye.
Kyle, aye.
All right, it's unanimous. Now we have a chair. Thank you to LCTV, we have a chair, officially.
Legally.
Legally, yes. Okay, let's talk about the vice chair. Obviously works in access chair when the chair isn't here, and also usually attends the meetings with the chair. You know, like the side meetings we talk about, setting the agenda when they can, things like that. So anyone interested in being vice chair?
I'll make it, anyone else want it?
I'll nominate Joe Knox.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion to nominate Joe on the floor and a second. So we'll go around the room again. Kevin?
Aye.
Rob, aye.
Joe, aye.
Charlotte, I.
Karen, I.
Tim, aye.
Betsy, aye.
Alan, aye.
Kyle, aye.
All right, it's unanimous again. We have a chair and a vice chair. Okay. Now the clerk.
Not the clerk.
Anyone? It's not that bad. It's actually
So it would be nice to have one of the new people that, maybe, just old guys have been around here forever, so, doing this stuff. So it's not the heavy lifting, but.
May I ask a question? And sorry, I'm sure that the learning curve is relatively steep, so apologies for all the questions. The clerk then has to be present at all of the deliberations, or only the ones that are posted meetings, and they're responsible for taking the notes of the posted meetings?
Yeah, so no position has to be at all of the meetings. So, if the clerk isn't at the meeting, you'll have a temporary clerk in place who's acting as clerk today. It can be any other member who can act as the clerk. But also, like what was mentioned, we're going to have some form of either AI.
There is going to be AI.
Doing the minutes, and if that fails, we do have our senior tax work-off program where we have members of the community actually watch the video and take the minutes and do elaborate minutes for us. So, and that would be something that would be you would look at as the clerk and make sure that it's that this is correct. You can make any corrections to it and then present it to the board for approval. That's kind of So don't ever worry about the attendance piece of it. The board will make sure that there's somebody acting as clerk when needed. So.
And the other thing with the notes, with the minutes thing, with things recorded now, you can actually do it after the fact, which didn't used to be the case,
Right.
but now it's a.
That's a huge deal because that happens. That's how we do it.
Right.
Minutes are taken not during. No more scribbling, sitting there, people trying to catch up. Slow down.
Trying to listen, right.
We have the AI, which is going to be interesting. This is a great committee, I think, to use it on. We'll see how it works.
So are you in?
I'll be happy to give it a shot.
Okay. So we have someone. You can't nominate yourself, but we have interest, so that's good.
Yeah, I'll nominate Charlotte.
Okay, we have a nomination
Second.
and a second. All right, we're going to do a roll call vote. Kevin?
Aye.
Rob, aye.
Joe, aye.
Karen, I. Do you get to vote?
Do I have
She can, yeah.
Okay.
Charlotte, I.
Tim, aye.
Betsy, yes.
Alan, aye.
Kyle, aye.
All right. We have a committee now. We are formed. So with that, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to probably sit over there with Jim for the remainder of this. I'll let you guys, Betsy, you could probably sit up front if you want.
Well, what else do you have
I'll
on
hand
there
over
to
the
do?
agenda. Very, very light agenda. Jim, I don't know if you want me to talk about your handouts, the security awareness training and testing.
Yes, please.
Why don't you go ahead and go through this?
What else did you hand over to me?
You can finish this meeting, Gary.
Okay, so the security awareness training and testing, this is part, a requirement. It deals with, if you guys each received one of these first, correct? Okay. Want to make sure that everybody looks this over. And this has to deal with, I'm assuming the emails that everyone has received an email at this point? Okay. So it's just kind of the required training that all of us that have a official town email have to take every year. And I know some people might already have one because they're on other committees, but, so just make sure that you're up to date in the training. And if you're not, you'll get an email saying you're not. So, any other questions, definitely reach out to IT or the clerk's office as well.
Just a comment maybe on the email.
Yeah.
I mean, those of us that have been on committees understand this, but the people that haven't might not know that it's very easy to send an email to a number of people, and even one person sending to another and another, and it becoming a quorum of the body and being a violation of the open meeting law. So generally, committee emails should be for very boring things like schedule and, can you meet next week, or, that you should never discuss substantive matters in the email.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we, obviously a lot of boards, select board included, we use email a lot and texting a lot, but we can never discuss things. It could be informational. Jim might put something out there as a horrible accident in Littleton, or, just putting the information out. We can't really deliberate over it. It's just for awareness for us, but it can be really a list of anything. It's just, you got to be careful not to get into a discussion, and usually the chair is kind of responsible, but self-police. Say, hey guys, we're crossing a line now. We're starting to talk about a little bit too much detail and deliberate a little bit about on the matter. So you kind of take that offline when you have to do that, one-on-ones and things like that. Just be aware of it. But email,
Gary?
Sure. Kevin?
Gary, it's Kevin. Was there, when we came together to be selected for this, was there talk about doing a primer on the open meeting law for this committee? Is that something we should consider?
What was the?
That's what Anthony was going to talk about that, I thought. Mel, am I right?
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about it.
There'll be more discussion on that. Anthony's going to be bringing that up. We'll talk more about it. Thanks, Kevin. Any other comments on the training and the use of the email? Just remember, it's a government email. Everything and anything that you do or discuss in these meetings is out there for the Freedom of Information Act. Someone can request it. So if you're sitting there texting during a meeting and going away, someone can actually request the documents and what you're talking about and sending. So that's all part of the meeting. So if you have a personal phone call or something, you should walk away and leave the meeting. Step outside, just because those type of things are foiable. All right. I really want to hand over the meat and potatoes of this to the Collins Center. So I want you guys to you're going to be guiding you guys along the whole way. Ton of experience in the room, as discussed, and people that have done this before. So we put a lot of faith in your group, and we appreciate, the select board appreciates what you guys are bringing to the table to move forward. So have at it.
All right, Anthony's going to kick it off.
Ellen has a
We have
question.
one
If we
question.
can.
One question. Go ahead.
When you went over the items of the
Yes.
Charter Review Committee,
Yep.
there's a two-liner at the bottom that I'm not quite sure that I understand. The Charter Review Committee should refer issues on such matters to committees charged with their responsibilities.
Yes. Okay, so it actually reads, the Charter Review Committee should refer issues on such matters
Such matters as what?
to those committees charged with the responsibilities, except to the extent the issue is directly critical to the structure of town government. So if there's, in other words, if you have something that is coming up discussion and you really need information on Parks and Recreation, you're really reaching out directly to Parks and Rec Commission. If you need to get information, you have the authority to reach out to that commission to get information from them. What I think this was put in there for is we didn't want just reaching out all these different boards and everything without kind of reaching out to us first. Let us know if you really need information. We don't want to burden you guys with waiting on discussion, things like that from other committees. So that makes sense. Or if you have information that you need from other groups in town. Is that kind of what we were talking about there, I
Yes.
believe? Yeah.
Yes. Board of Health, Planning.
But that seems to be what we would do. In order to do any of these things that you got here, you got to reach out to committees to see what they're doing.
Correct.
But why do we have to go
As
through?
it pertains to, no, you don't. That's what this is saying. As it pertains to this.
Okay.
That's all. Just, you're making sure that as it pertains to the structure of our town government, because part of your charge is to discuss, hey, does this committee or board even need to be a committee or board? So that can get, you know what I mean? It can get a little bit edgy if you start digging like that. So we want to make sure that that's the focus of it. You're just trying to find out, what does the committee do? How often do they meet? Things like that. You're trying to find out redundancies, efficiencies, and things like that. So we want to make sure that it kind of sticks to that.
Okay.
That's all. But
Just
you
to
put me on
help
the
with
spot.
that, Lisa sent out a document today that Jim had her forward, and it came late this afternoon, and I just happened to have time, and I looked at it and I read it. It's really good. You look at it first, it's like 20 pages long, but it's an easy read, and it really will give you a much more confidence, because it's the report that the state did on Littleton last year and why we're doing this. It gives background, what we're doing. It really will help a lot in terms of understanding, I think,
Yeah.
a lot of what exactly this is about.
Yeah, that should be something that gets shared probably with the.
Everybody's got it in their
Oh,
email.
okay.
It just came
Okay.
late this afternoon, so probably most people didn't get a
I
chance to
haven't-
read it yet.
I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think, everybody good? We'll move forward. Anthony? Thank you.
Can everyone see the slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm gonna, we have just sort of a what I would call like a primer on the charter process for the committee and some first steps in terms of a work plan that the committee will follow during this process. I think someone a little earlier said that there's a steep learning curve. This is going to feel like a sort of fire hose of information. You're not meant to walk out of this meeting as experts. We're going to just sort of take you over the at 30,000 foot, just what this process is going to look like, and give some people a general introduction to the charter as it relates to town administration. I know there's at least one member of the committee that's been on a town government study committee before. For many of you, this may be very new, so feel free to interrupt during the course of this presentation with any questions. There's going to be time at the end for question and response, but we want this to be as interactive and useful for you as possible. So, we've already done introductions, so I'm going to skip this slide. Myself and Mel, we also have a third member that's helping more with research as questions arise. And let me just give you members of the committee a quick background on the Collins Center. So the Collins Center was created in 2008 by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, put inside of UMass Boston with the specific purpose of providing technical assistance to municipalities and state agencies. And we provide assistance on any number of areas, from finance to human resources to what we're doing here, charter and organizational structure. We work with more than 2/3 of the cities and towns in Massachusetts of a variety of sizes and structures. We work with communities with a small population, under 1,000, to your larger communities with over 100,000 residents. We work with every form of government, and we've helped with everything from transitions, as I think you discussed a little earlier, from one form of government to another. That is, just as an example, an open town meeting to a representative town meeting. But we've also helped communities just create charters that codify their existing structure and perhaps implement some best practices in terms of operation and codifying that within their charter document. And Mel, I think I'm turning it over to you to go over the forms of government.
Sure, thanks, Anthony. Go to the next slide. So in Massachusetts, there really are only 4 types of overall forms of government. You've got, in the town form of government, you have the open town meeting, which you are, and a representative form of town meeting. And you'll see that there's only 32 communities in the Commonwealth to have a representative town meeting. Now, you have to have at least 6,000 population, so that would eliminate many towns in Massachusetts. But technically, Littleton is eligible to become a representative town meeting if it chooses. The difference between open town meeting and representative town meeting are really only limited to the legislative side. You still have a select board, you still have a town administrator, and everything else that you have today. The really only difference between those two are the way the town meeting is organized and run. On the city side, I'll just mention quickly, you have all councils. In cities, you do not have select board or town meeting, you have a council, and they can be, the executive there can be a mayor or a city manager. And there's many cities in Massachusetts, and I should say that there are many towns that have become city forms of government. They haven't called themselves cities, but Amherst, for example, is the most recent example of that, and Framingham prior to that. They became cities but call themselves towns, and but they operate that way. Now, that is not eligible. You are not eligible for that because the Constitution says that you must have at least 12,000 people to do that, and you don't. So we're going to not even talk about that, where a lot of communities want to try to, if they're 12,000, they want to look at everything, but you really can't. So I suggest the committee doesn't spend a lot of time on city forms. It's interesting, this next slide, you see that the vast majority on the left of municipalities are open town meeting. Over almost 75% of them, and that's largely by virtue of their population. Many of them just couldn't be if they wanted to be. But open town meeting is very popular. There is a 9% of communities that have adopted the representative towns, and then cities are less of about 17% total. But interestingly, on the right-hand side, you see where the vast majority of citizens in Massachusetts, residents, live in cities, and as a result, they are in mayor council forms. There's some in the city manager form, and then only 33% of the communities are in of people who live in Massachusetts live in open town meetings, but 75% of the community. So we find that kind of interesting notion. Next slide, Anthony, and the next. When we talk about charter, I'd like to just explain that a little bit. So in Littleton and in most towns like yours, you are created by the state. All cities and towns are created by the state. And you are basically a combination of 200 and more years of state laws, your bylaws, your special acts that may have passed to deal with Littleton. But for the most part, it's hard to put your finger on all these, when they happened and how they evolved over 200 years. And what a charter tends to do is consolidates things and explains and puts into a document. And by the way, a charter has more legal authority than bylaws. Charters are superior to bylaws, and charters are typically either authorized by the legislature through the Constitution, or in your case, if you were going to develop a charter, you would have to submit it to the state legislature, unless we're talking about very basic things. But for the most part, charters are superior because they're an act of the state legislature. And they have a way of cleaning up these 200 years of stuff that it becomes a little bit more explainable and understandable, and we think it's a good government tool. But anyway, so what you'll see in a charter, now this is what we call a comprehensive charter, and it really covers every aspect of town government at the high level. You'll still have bylaws to talk about and regulations, but these will talk about all of these issues: the legislative branch, how the executive branch is, all the questions that Gary talked about and that are listed in your charge. They're all listed in the charter. So what we tend to do is we'll follow this table of contents, if you will, and it'll be part of our working with you. We'll kind of cover all of these areas and identify areas where you as the committee need to think about when we talk about all these things. And I'm guessing you will bring a lot of your own committees in and try to find out how it's done now and whether there's any thoughts about any change. We are not pushing change necessarily. The Collins Center is really your resource. If you want to change, we want to provide you with the information. But really, we're supporting you as a community. And what charters do is they provide you with your home rule. The Constitution of Massachusetts says cities and towns can decide how they want to be organized, even if there are some state laws that are different. And so charters are really a very powerful tool for cities and towns. So that's the big picture on charters. Next slide. So they provide some flexibility. So there are many state laws that say, if you wanted to consolidate your finance department, here's the way to do it. Here's an option to do it. The charters, you can decide your own way, and they are totally acceptable to be in diversion from state law. Depends on the state law, but mostly you can do it the way you want to do. Stability. What you have to do to adopt a charter and to change a charter is you need to go to your town meeting, number one, and get authorization for essentially a special act. And then if it passes at the legislature, it has to come back for a popular vote. Now, again, these are big issues. This is a big charter. If you have a smaller charter, you're trying to just fine-tune a few things, maybe not. But for the most part, it does require a special act, and because of that, it's harder to change it. And that's the idea. We want the charter to be sort of above, the politics of the day, where sometimes you go to town meeting and there's a problem with X, Y, or Z, and you just change it because you can do it at town meeting. Here, it's a little bit more difficult, which is good because these are the big way you're governing, and you don't want to do it willy-nilly. You want to have a document that's hard to change and does require some deliberation and a lot of municipal involvement. And then transparency, where I really think that's the number one part of a charter. Even if you were just going to document what you do and try to explain all those 200 years of stuff that you've developed over the years, I find charters are really helpful, not only for the public, but also for the people around this table or people who are in government. Sometimes you don't know why it's done a certain way. You say, well, that's the way it's always done. And what you'll find as you go through this process, some of the things you've been doing, really we can't find any real legal basis, and so sometimes a charter allows you to clean things up, and but clearly it's a nice tool to be transparent about your government, so nobody says who does this. If I want to get something done in the town, who's in charge, and who appoints this person, and so on. So next slide, Anthony. Go ahead. Next.
Is this me, Mel?
Yes, go ahead. Yes. Thank you, Anthony.
So I'm going to get a little bit here into the nuts and bolts about how the committee will operate to review the community and potentially put forward a charter for adoption. So first, Mel touched on this a little bit, but sort of at a high level, how is this committee able to create a charter? So there are two paths, and I'm not going to spend much time on the first, except to say that there's one path in which there is a elected charter commission that is really spontaneously generated in the community through the collection of signatures. And that collection of signatures would be put on the ballot to then elect a charter, what they call a charter commission, to do the job that this committee is going to do. That's one path to creating a charter under Chapter 43B. What Littleton is doing is taking what we call the special act path. And what the special act path consists of, sort of at a high level, is the committee is going to review what's going on in town, think about how the town should operate sort of in an ideal sense, and draft the legislative language of the charter. Once that document is drafted, it will then send it to the select board to place on a town meeting warrant for the town meeting to vote to send up to the state legislature. The legislature will vote on it and send it back for an adoption of the town. Again, there can be some nuances there depending on sort of how much change or how impactful the change is, that some of those steps might change a little bit. But generally speaking, that's the process, especially for a community like yours that doesn't currently have a charter. So you've completed this first step, which is the formation of the committee, which is going to do a lot of the legwork in terms of reviewing documents and speaking with existing town officials. The document the legislative language that will go up to the state, that will be included in the second point, which is the final report and recommendation. I'm going to stop here on the final report for a second to sort of emphasize, and this will come up a little bit later in the slides, but the report can include things. There are a lot of issues in town. It sounds like a lot of people here have spent a lot of time working in town government, either as volunteers or actually working in town. And as you know, there are a lot of issues facing towns or that citizens want addressed. Some of those issues are going to be relevant for the charter. Some of those issues the charter might not be the best place to address them. The final report is useful in explaining why the committee is making certain recommendations, why it doesn't make certain recommendations, and there may be things that come up during your process that you would like the community to look into further, and you can put that recommendation in your final report to say, we heard something about potholes or how potholes are being filled. That's not really within our purview, but we recommend that go to, and I don't know what the appropriate committee would be in Littleton, but we recommend that goes to the appropriate committee for further study. So that's going to be your output. Your output's going to be this final report recommendations, and included in the report is going to be this legislative language that we talked about that's going to go up to the state. And one thing that I wanted to sort of talk about before I go a little bit further about what the committee's going to do is, as a public committee, you're going to be subject to the open meeting law. And so with certain exceptions, all meetings of a public body must be held in public. What I think one of the interesting things where people get tripped up on, and this was addressed earlier, is that a meeting is any deliberation of the members of the public body on a matter that's within the body's jurisdiction. A lot of people think of as a meeting as people physically, or I guess now in our time, electronically getting together, but that's not what it means. It includes things like emails going to all members of the committee and sort of a deliberation happening within that email chain. It actually even includes sort of carousel telephone where people start making phone calls down the telephone. So I think the high point, or sort of the thing to really take away at the open meeting law without sort of spending too much time on it is, aside of a few things like scheduling and logistics, a quorum of the body should not be communicating about what it's going to be discussing outside of what we're doing here in the room, and things of that nature. I'm just going to stop here for a second, and Mel, tell me, because I'm not in the room. Any questions quickly here on the open meeting law before I go to the next slide?
Looks
I'm
like
not
we're
hearing
good.
any, so I'm going to.
No, it looks like we're good.
I would just say, I'm sure you've heard this before, that an open meeting does not allow anybody to come to a meeting and just participate. It's really to observe. You may, and you probably will want to at some point, engage the public in a more formal way. But in an open meeting, the chair really just determines who speaks and who doesn't, and there is no obligation to let folks in the public speak at a meeting. But as I said, you probably want to do that at some points in your process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel.
Anthony?
Yeah.
Anthony, it's Kevin. And I'm a big believer in not pushing the limits here, but let me probe something. If I go to the grocery store Saturday morning and run into another charter committee member, am I allowed to discuss matters with them one-on-one? Is that a violation of the open meeting law, or is it permissible?
Well, these theoreticals can be very tough. And I'll be honest, the open meeting law has been heavily litigated. I guess what I would say is, I guess a one-on-one conversation would be permissible if you ran into someone to have a conversation. However, be aware that there's something called serial communication. So if you talk to someone, you express an opinion about something that you should be voting on, and then they continue that down, and that same conversation sort of flows to everyone on the body or quorum of the body, that could, in theory, be found to be a violation. So it's a little bit of a fine line to walk, and you're going to have to use your best judgment outside there. I can say, honestly, we can think of a lot of different scenarios. Most of the time, if you're just trying to do the right thing, you're not going to run afoul of the open meeting law.
Thank you.
All right,
Charlotte has a
Sorry,
question.
At the risk
Oh,
of
sorry.
belaboring this topic, so if, for instance, and I think this relates to the quorum part, so if 2 or 3 individuals have been tasked with deliberating on something, drafting something, researching something, if that is under the quorum, then those deliberations do or do not have to be public.
It's a little tricky. If you have a formal subcommittee, if you're creating a formal subcommittee, even though it may be less than a quorum, if it's designated as a formal subcommittee of this body, technically it should be part of the open meeting law. Your committee is an advisory committee, so I'm going to give you an example. If somebody said, Charlotte, I want you and Joe to work on something and bring it back to this committee and we'll talk about it and deliberate it, I really don't think that you two working together, as long as it's coming back to this body, would be a problem. That would be a problem. I'm guessing you're not going to create formal subcommittees, but if you do, you might want to talk to the town administrator or town council's office about that.
I'm gonna go to the next slide. Great. So this is just the typical committee work plan. There's just some of the points that we're gonna sort of reach. So obviously, thoroughly researching the current structure and operations of the current town. Now that takes many forms. We're going to do a review of your ordinances. We've already, Mel and myself have already looked at some of them. So you've got some ordinances. So some of the things that we cover, some stuff about town meeting, when it should be, what the quorum should be for the town meeting, the creation of the warrant. You've got some stuff in your bylaws about the select board. So a lot of that stuff that would be part of our research, and that would also be ported over, to the extent you want to keep it, over to the charter. There should be, we'd recommend some interviews with town staff and perhaps some town boards and committees, depending on their function, if we think they rise to the level of being represented in the charter. Some committees that we're probably going to spend some time with are elected boards and committees, to the extent that there are some in town. And we're going to look at stuff like your elections information, the appointment process, things of that nature. As Mel had alluded to a little bit earlier, we really recommend that you have a small portion of all your meetings dedicated to public comment. So I think in most of my committees, it's usually at the end of the meeting where they allow anyone who's in the audience to sort of add their input on what they've heard. But in addition to that, we recommend throughout this process at least 2 meetings at various points in the process where you have an entire meeting dedicated to hearing from the public. And usually we'd have the first one after you've gotten some ways into developing the language that you think should be in the charter. That way, members of the public are going to sort of have some work product to look at and sort of chime in and say, we do or don't agree with that. And then part of that meeting can also be a discussion about where the committee thinks it's going to go next. And so you can get some public input there. And then the second meeting is usually, as the committee is sort of wrapping up its work, and it gets some real public comment about why you are where you are and what you're going to put forward. I like to tell the committees to think of the public as a sort of another chair in the room, because they don't, just because you may hear that some people do or don't like a thing, doesn't necessarily mean it has any more voice than the rest of the members around the table, but you definitely want to hear those concerns out, and to the extent they need to be addressed, to address them. One of the things that we're hoping to help you out with is research other forms of government around the Commonwealth. And while it says other forms of government, if you keep the form that you have, there are other town meeting, other town meeting governments or municipalities around the Commonwealth that may do things a little bit differently than Littleton, and you may want to adopt some of those operational changes in your community. One of the things that we do is we provide an overview on sort of trends, what communities are starting to do. That's where the best practices come from. And again, this might be the first time that you're really putting together a charter, so there may be some things that are emerging or new that you might want to adopt. And we also help you prepare the report with recommendations for the select board. And finally, some people, I think, get a little concerned, but I have to be honest with you, the process does take usually 12 to 18 months. A lot of that will depend on how in depth the process is, and if there could be some real disagreements on what direction some people might want to go, and so you want to give time to sort of hash those things out and sort of get into this process. And I already sort of covered with you the Special Act process, but again, this is going to go to the legislature. This is some inside baseball about what happens at the legislature. They're going to convert it into a bill, and they're going to send it back to the community for an up or down vote on the ballot. One thing to sort of note here that isn't sort of in the written language is, at some point the committee is going to get close to the end, and usually it's better to send something up to the legislature in the early spring if you want to have it appear on a ballot later in the year. So that's just something to consider. This will become more important later in the process, but as we get towards wrapping up, then you're going to think about your timelines and when you're going to send that charter up, and how you're going to, and sort of how you want to have all those things coordinated. Mel, am I doing trends or are you doing trends?
I'll do those, Anthony. As I said before, the Collins Center is not recommending any particular form of government or aspects within the government. We're going to help you identify the options, talk a little bit about pros and cons, maybe identify some communities who do it that way, and look at that. But what we want to show you is what we've found is what some of the trends are when communities take on charters. We are seeing at least a consideration, but often a reduction in the number of elected officials and boards in an effort to centralize management. As municipal government's gotten more complicated and complex, more control, often communities find it better to be exercised in a more centralized fashion. So you'll see that. Emphasis on budget process, and I know that's in your charge. Budget is probably the most important document or function that a community does, at least a legislature does every year, an executive, and then the legislature approves it. And that process is important because it really defines who's making those decisions, who's identifying, whose responsibility it is to prepare certain things and do those things. And what we're finding is budgets are really important because it really defines the priorities of the community. And that's also the case with the long-term capital plan. We're finding more communities are focusing on not only on their operating budget, but on their capital, and are starting to include these processes or organizations within their charter. You probably have some in your bylaws, but we're finding them elevated to the charter level. Highlighting powers as of a town, that's just boilerplate, but one of the important things, you'll look at some of these charters, and it pretty much states home rule, which is a constitutional amendment to the state constitution. It provides you with legal authority to organize the way you want to, and you want to explain that and assert that in your charter. Technology, is becoming an issue, whether it's the way you post meetings, the way you have meetings, and just, general technology, how it's influenced the way that government, local government is operated. Often you'll find that, some of that coming into your charter. Standardized procedures for the conduct and operation of local government administration, the operation of boards and committees. Some of that comes with that consolidation of committees into appointed, but even when you have elected bodies, the charter often tells you, you can be independent to some level, but when it comes to whether it's appointing your personnel or paying your personnel or creating procedures, there are some boundaries. And that's often what you'll see in a charter, and it's very important when you do have elected bodies that, there is some borders around there. Gender references, common, very common, changing board of selectmen to select board, which I'm sure you've either done or thought about, and a lot of those things. You're just trying to make it more gender neutral. And then a requirement to always go back and have a look back. Some of it's 5 years, some of it's 10 years, but it's almost a requirement. It would be a requirement in your charter that you have to convene a committee like yours every 10 years or so. And quite often those are not like what you're doing now, which is looking at everything from A to Z. But, you're tweaking things and you're not letting your charter get too far out of date. There are also a few other things. Residency requirements, I don't know if you have those, but those are typically you're not seeing those requirements as much anymore. Sometimes you see them with your chief appointed administrator, but often you see them in other areas, and we're not seeing those often, especially in eastern Massachusetts. Mechanisms for assuring the charter is enforced, that's fairly boilerplate. Emergency management is often an area, especially after COVID, really, focused on what happens in emergencies and what happens when a community has to act right away in an emergency. And so sometimes you'll see those in charters. Community engagement, very important. Requirement, and you see that a lot in the budget process, requirements for public hearings, requirements for the town to have processes to communicate out to residents and mechanisms to listen to them. Sometimes you find those. And then a whole area of resident initiatives. I don't know offhand, I don't believe you have a recall provision for your elected officials. Often the resident initiatives are in state law, and wouldn't change those because there's a lot of ability for residents to petition under an open town meeting and a representative town meeting for that matter. But recall is often one that communities want to talk about. How do we get rid of an elected official who's behaved poorly or, done something illegally or what have you? The state law does not have an automatic recall for cities and towns. You have to adopt one under a charter type of provision. So, as I said, we will help facilitate your analysis of all these issues. We will not, let something slide. We have a pretty good system of, keeping you on track and covering those things. And when appropriate, we'll give you some sample language. We might say, well, Concord does it this way, Acton does it this way. Here's a couple of examples and things like that. Okay, next is for you, Anthony.
Can you see?
It just went away. Oh, now you're on there twice.
Oh, the technology is biting me. I can get it back. Well, so.
There you go. We only have a couple more slides.
All right, so next steps. So we're really going to turn it over to you. And again, this is probably, like I said, the fire hose, and probably 5 or 6 slides back, we started to speak a different language to you as you're hearing all this information. But we really want to turn it to you with a couple of questions. One is, for the committee to think about, you're all on here because you have a certain perspective. You definitely have an engagement with your local community. So, what are some of the reasons that you're on the committee? What are some major issues relative to the operation and function of the town that you're interested in. Want to let everyone know that not all issues can be examined and resolved in the charter. The charter should really focus on who's the decision maker. So I put some examples there: select board, town administrator, town meeting, the various committees. So you're really thinking about who should be making certain decisions. Should those decision makers be elected versus appointed? And we do have a whole, when we really get into that, we have a whole framework for how you think about who should be elected versus who should be appointed. And then think through the decision-making process. A lot of that's going to really be around how quickly you want decisions to be made in certain circumstances, how much public input there really should be, and who should all be participating in these various discussions. And as I said earlier, issues that are sort of called out of scope, we can still raise those in the committee report to the extent that the committee has a real interest in something that may not be appropriate for the committee. So I'm going to turn it over to the committee with one other quick charge, which is, so we gave you these sort of the most common sections or articles in the charter. We usually start our deliberations looking at the charter. It's not going to make sense to you to look at the document as a whole. So we usually start by looking at each of these sections in turn, and we usually start with either the legislative branch, which in your case would be the town meeting, or the executive branch, which is the select board and the town administrator. So we can start to have discussion on the things that I talked about before, and whether you want to start, whether you have a preference with which article you'd like to start discussing. And don't be scared, we're not going to necessarily start writing immediately, but we can start really thinking about what these different town functions do, how they should operate, and how they currently operate. So with that, I will turn it back to the committee.
So I don't know if anybody has something they especially want to say, or Tim. I mean, you are so vested in this, and then you might or not. So to me, it's the question is we can pick one of those. Probably, I'm not hearing anybody saying one particular. So I'm more interested right now is like the next meeting. How does it work? What do we do? What comes in? What information comes in? And what are we doing in the next meeting? That'll help me know how we proceed.
That's a good question. I think what I would recommend, well, I'll just give the committee what I think is generally a recommendation. I usually recommend to sort of start with the legislative branch because it's the one that all residents in the community have participated in. That's a town meeting, and it's the biggest, most common feature of your town that most residents have interacted with in some way. We can come in with some general information about the town meeting. We will pull from your bylaws about what current regulations you have, and we can pull some example language about how other communities do it that we think may be good examples. I also recommend so to start that.
But you'll do that. Meeting. You'll get even the information about Littleton. You'll bring that into the meeting. So we don't have to do that, or we don't have to go get it from somebody else here to bring to the meeting. You take care of that for us.
Correct.
Okay.
And one of the things that we'll sort of start. I mean, we'd start having this conversation tonight. I don't know how long this meeting's scheduled to go, but we'd also recommend. There are some people to talk to about the town meeting. The town manager and maybe a member of the select board, because they're the ones drafting the warrant for the items that go on the town meeting agenda, as well as the moderator.
We have our moderator on the team, so we've got town meeting covered, I think.
Yeah. So, but you want to have a structured discussion about
right,
those things.
Exactly.
Everybody in the committee has a strong understanding before they start making some decisions about how they want it to look.
So with some of these meetings, do you normally see us going out and getting information before and then coming to the meeting and discussing it? Or would we have somebody come into the meeting to tell us that we'd ask questions to as a group and say how?
Well, both. So the way this usually works is the committee will have a discussion and we'll have some questions. We'll usually do some research to respond to the questions. It's not uncommon for committee members to do their own research. Mm-hmm. But anything that the committee tasks us with, we'll sort of do the global research around the Commonwealth and bring that back to you. And then, you dedicate some meetings or maybe some portions of meetings to meeting with town officials and peppering them with questions. Now, I'd recommend doing some of the research first so you have a basis for your questions to when you have officials come in so you can make the best use of that time. So that's usually the way. So I would say, I would think about the next meeting as sort of thinking about an area you want to dip your toe in. We'll start doing the research on that area, and then you can think about who you'd want to come in to sort of talk to you about some of the assumptions we might develop in the research.
Did you have a question, Charlotte?
I was actually going to ask something that built from what you were asking, which is what exactly is the relationship with the Collins Center? I don't know if we have, maybe that's something I missed, but in terms of the engagement, how much time do we have? Who do we have? Is it a team? You mentioned there's an additional person in addition to the two of you. I think just understanding that division of labor and the time and what can we say, oh yeah, they'll be doing that versus what we should do. Maybe you could give us an example.
Sure. When
of
there
how
is
that works.
material that is something that we want to explain to you, we will prepare it and present it. There are going to be meetings where we're not around. In fact, we are limited as to how many physical meetings that we can go to with our contract. So we're going to try to distribute those the best way possible. So when there's technical issues and options, it'll be us. We'll be doing that research, we'll be presenting to you, and then perhaps you'll take a meeting on your own to talk about it. And then there's other meetings where we don't need to be around. You might be wanting to interview the Board of Assessors or the school committee or what have you, and we might prepare some questions that we think are appropriate, but we don't have to be there. So we're going to try to work with you to coordinate that. But whenever there's anything technical, legal, that's where we will come in.
And if I may, a sort of, I guess maybe administrative technicality, does that contract get like shared with the chair so that we can prioritize your time? I just wonder, what's the mechanism for us understanding what that resource
Sure. Well,
looks
what
like?
we have been doing typically is we'll meet with the chair and whoever the chair may want us to meet with, and we'll keep talking, well, we had this meeting and now, the next meeting would be this, and we'll say, but we have limitations on our meeting. So that's typically where we will not negotiate, but just discuss, the best use of our time with the chair and the town administrator as well.
Good question, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a follow-on to that. So you're engaged with the town of Littleton in a contract?
We have a contract.
Okay. How do we ensure, so your group is the one that's going out, researching, presenting data to us
Correct.
for us to make an informed decision.
Right.
How do you ensure that you're transparent and there's no conflict of interest? Because if you're presenting the data, how can we be sure that it's not trying to drive the board or the committee to a certain decision?
Well, we've consulted in a lot of places in Massachusetts, and that's not our practice. We don't do that. If we had a conflict, and I'm not sure what a conflict would be.
I'm not sure either, but I know.
But we would disclose that or not participate. For example, if there was a town that I worked in as the town administrator, I would not work for that town. That's not a legal conflict necessarily, but we wouldn't do that. So I guess, I don't know, Anthony, you got a better answer to that?
Yeah, I think sort of going in the direction of the example might be helpful, so I'll sort of go along that line. So, for example, there was some discussion earlier about keeping the open town meeting versus going to a representative town meeting. We're going to present to you the facts and what we think is the fairest way possible. They may put one in a certain light versus the other. Obviously, changing your town meeting would be something of great interest to the community. But we don't prevent, I guess it's sort of on the committee to sort of assess whether or not they think that we've sort of given them fair advice. I would say from the communities that we've been in, I think, we're open for questions. We come to the meetings. It's not uncommon for members of the board to disagree and for us to sort of just state, here's what the information is. We provide you with citations and locations for where we got all the information. And again, we encourage communities to bring in interviewees, for example, maybe a member of another community. Even we can help you find someone from a community that has a representative town meeting, where you can question them on your own to say, how do things work? We have this concern or that concern, and sort of respond to those things. So I could just say that, we do our best to sort of present you with the data in sort of an open and fair context, and then we'll definitely help you put together structures if you want to. And we encourage you to get more data and sort of bring in people to talk to, so that you can get the fair and balanced approach that you're looking for.
All right, thank you.
That's if I may ask a question.
Sure.
We'll make a statement. First, I think it's a complete asset to have Collins here, because I can think back to 20 years ago when we had the committee. We basically went to a storage room on the second floor. There were 8 of us, and we had a piece of paper. And although the Department of Local Services was a great asset to us, and we relied heavily on them, but we were out on our own. We didn't have you people here to get us going and to do the research. We had to break up into groups all on our own and decide where we were going and whatnot. So I think this is a great start that you've done, and a great asset that you're doing for us.
Thank you.
May I?
Anthony and Mel, it's Kevin. I have a question, or maybe it's more of a statement than a question. I have a belief that any serious project, any big, important project deserves a project plan. Should we have a project plan so that we can work through all the work that needs to be done, sometimes in parallel on different matters, so that we get to the, you were saying earlier about being mindful about perhaps presenting something to the state in the springtime. So have you ever helped folks devise a project plan, a timeline for working through an endeavor like this?
So the short answer is yes. I guess the simple answer is what we recommend in terms of a project planning. And we've done this, and in fact, that would be sort of the plan here to draft one and sort of present to you for your approval. But we usually recommend that the project plan should follow the articles that would end up being in the charter. Now, that doesn't mean that those articles, you may not want to have one, but we talk about they basically cover all the important topics for town operation. And, you can have other articles, but basically we sort of go through that. And again, we recommend to sort of start at the high level, either the executive branch or the legislative, and then we can go through things like the school committee, other elected officials, town administration, which includes the creation, modification, or deletion of departments in town, various appointment authorities, things like that. So what we would do is we take that slide that you saw with all the different articles, we'd sort of break that up to say, we expect the meetings in, let's say 2 meetings in April, or to cover this article, and then we move on to that, and we parse that out along this 12 to 16-month time period.
But isn't the charter, I recognize that the work on the charter is a big part of this, and it will probably, if you did a Gantt chart or whatever, it would probably start next meeting and go throughout this. But there's other activities that we need to be doing in parallel, are there not? We need to be meeting with the select board. We need to meet, maybe a meeting dedicated to public comment. So it just occurs to me that there's probably things that need to be happening in parallel. Interviews, perhaps, over the course. And communicate, and somewhere in here, there's a statement in the charter document that says, the LLC should ensure public outreach and communication throughout the process. I take that very seriously. How are we going to be purposeful and honor that obligation? And I think we need to be planful. I think the answer is we need to be planful about that very important obligation. So I'll be quiet.
Anthony, if I could.
Go ahead.
We have developed these work plans. Sometimes we call them syllabus, other times we call them work plans, and we do exactly that. We will put in time, this is the time for your initial public forum. Or, while you're considering the executive, you better talk to the select board, or, town meeting, you need to talk to the moderator, elections, you need to talk to the town clerk. So we'll try to flesh that out. And when we meet with the chair, and when you decide how often you want to meet with the frequency, then we'll be able to tie that together. So the answer is, you're right. We don't want to make it too complex. We want to create some flexibility, but we definitely have a plan with dates and milestones.
Yeah, as Anthony said, if we decide to move through the charter in a particular, that list of items in the charter, it occurs to me that if we're going to move through the charter, those topics in a particular sequence, we might have planned events that correspond to those topics as we move through them, interviewing subject matter experts on that topic or this topic. So,
well,
okay.
Kevin, these are very good points, and I just add to Mel's statement. I guess I would recommend to be a little bit careful about the parallel task, only because for two reasons. The first reason is that everyone's on the committee is coming to this with a different background in this material, and so it really, it makes sense. I've seen committees go off the rails. We're going to spend a lot of time here sort of building up everybody's base of knowledge, and that's going to be really sort of important throughout the process. And then number two, when you get to a meeting or meetings dedicated to public comment, the public is going to have a lot less knowledge or information about the charter and the internals of government than this committee will have, really at any given point in time in this process. And so it's better to have some concrete language for them to look at about some decisions that you made. So it slots into the process as its own meeting versus being sort of parallel to the process. Some places where parallelism may really work well is as you're, and again, I'm looking at the first public comment maybe being 5, maybe 6 months out from here, but you may want to put together a subcommittee on coordinating the room, getting flyers out, things of that nature. But I guess I would say at this beginning stage, and you'll see this when we do a work plan, I don't think you're necessarily there yet to necessarily be concerned about. Now, there may be other things you might want to consider for a subcommittee or something, but that's where I've usually seen some of the effort go into, like, as you're saying, these external events. But I think it's a little premature at this point to go and dedicate something to go out to public when you haven't really made any decisions.
Kevin, I certainly agree about the project plan. We need to have one. So, you start out with a really high level one, and then you drill down further as you get further along in different topics and so on. But I think it's a great point. And I think everybody feels better if there's a roadmap of where we're going and the timelines and so on. So that's great. And I'm sure these guys will help us with that a lot. So thanks for bringing that up also.
You're welcome. Thank you.
May I ask another
Sure,
question?
okay.
Well, just to reinforce that comment, I think that's where I think it'd be helpful maybe to have a sort of menu of services, perhaps, or something like that from the Collins Center. So we don't always have to say, can you do this? Are you able to do that? But rather maybe something that speaks to those
All right, we'll get a copy of that
options.
contract and see what's in there. It's probably in there, but we'll look and see. Good point.
And then one clarification, and sorry if I got this confused. Reviewing bylaws, is that part of this process? I think it was something that was mentioned in this document, but is that part of what we'll be doing or not? Or is it a question?
Yeah. Because you don't have a charter, your bylaws are very important. And so if we were going to develop a charter, we'd want to find out which bylaws are, should be sort of transitioned over to the charter. Bylaws, we're going to really understand the bylaws. So when we talk about things, we're going to say, and by the way, your bylaws say you do it this way. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way, but I think you should know how your town works. And we'll be doing that research in connection with doing our research on these various aspects of the of a charter.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so question, the material that was sent out earlier today that I know all of us haven't seen, if I read it correctly, there was consideration, recommendation that there's even a separate group, a bylaws committee of several people to do that. I just want to hear that that's off the table and the select board has already determined there's not going to be a separate group dealing with bylaws, et cetera, because I think I read something about that in the material that was just sent out this afternoon.
Did you hear that, Gary?
Yeah, kind of. So our bylaws.
So what he's referring to is the study that the state did last year and that report that they did. And in there it talks about maybe there's a separate committee that looks at bylaws versus this committee. But it sounds like here, this is the committee.
It is, and also there is on the warrant this May, there's going to be personnel bylaw that the Personnel Advisory Committee is reviewing. So we're constantly updating and putting those in front of the town to discuss. So, but as far as a complete discussion of the current bylaws, maybe tweaks, this committee.
It's got to be part of this.
Well,
Because
yeah,
if you're looking
one
at
of
this,
the
it could be
things
superside or
Right.
could
if we
could clash with
decide not to
them,
go
so.
with a charter,
Right.
Right, it has
the
to be.
bylaws continue to be an enormous part of our governance.
And they always will be. You always will have bylaws, but I would really caution the town that if you have this committee in place and are looking at different things, and then you have a bylaw proposal next spring that says, we want to change something, I think you'd want to be aware of it, at least at a minimum, and maybe say, well, why are we working, proposing these while we're still looking at the big picture?
Okay, so now here's my question. So I haven't read the bylaws, I don't even know how they're organized, or if they are organized, or if it's just a random, we've added a new one, we added a new one, we added a new one. So next week, or the next time we meet, we're gonna talk about the legislative process. How do we know which bylaws apply, and how do we go organize?
We will identify them. I think one of the good reasons to start with legislative is it's not that complicated because state law governs most of everything you do. But there are some aspects, and I think we want to talk about the town moderator and who the town moderator appoints, because that's usually part of legislative. And but when there's a relevant bylaw, we will identify it for you. We'll say, your bylaws say this, just so you know.
So I assume the bylaws are probably on our website someplace, is that true, that everybody could read?
Yeah.
Yes, on the town website?
Yeah, they are, but they're reviewing our bylaws in the context of a new charter or a special act or something to do with governance. They're not looking at zoning, they're not.
Right, yeah, right,
there are
no, there's a
bylaws.
lot of stuff in there, right, yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And town council keeps kind of a running tally of like things that need to be addressed
Okay.
when we get around to it. Like
Okay.
some town meeting that's a little light on articles, they'll put through an article
stuff
like
up,
with
yeah.
all the typos and, everything that needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah,
If
okay.
if you talk to Tom, he'd probably tell you he's got a ticker file of bylaws that need to be. But these guys are concerned specifically with those bylaws.
Yeah, we won't be talking about signed bylaws or
Yeah,
anything
exactly,
like
yeah.
that, right? But whenever there's relevant bylaw that relates to an organizational structure, we will make sure you know it.
So part of your role is to just know the Littleton bylaws, and
Correct.
which ones to pull out. That's
Totally.
part of what you
Yep.
do when you're
Yep.
off, okay.
And special acts, by the way. So there's, often ways to sometimes you can't do something by a bylaw, you have to petition the legislature. So there are special acts that are probably in place, and we'll want to tease those out and find out where those are and what those do. And a lot of times people forget about those, it might have been passed in 1975 or 85, but they're out
Some of
there.
the things you're talking about, right? that-
Yeah.
that Tom has a list of. Okay, so are we ready to talk about the next meeting and what we need to do and proceed and get going?
I are.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Monday night's the night for people, I guess, right? That's what we've determined. From the Collins Center, we're obviously going to need a lot of your help, especially for the first meeting, to get us started, to know what the information is. We're going to talk about the legislature branch, and I think we should do a very high-level project plan also. I think that everybody would feel good about that. So what are our next steps? You have some work to do, and once we go through one, we'll get a better feel for what's happening here, but
If I may, Madam Chair.
Sure.
So it sounds like you're going to meet every other Monday, starting with this Monday?
Sound good? Or you want twice a month? You want to just do every other Monday? Let's do every other Monday. Let's start with that. People good with that? Yep.
And then and Mel may just touch base with people before you walk out of me, but with that being the case, perhaps me, you, Mel, and the vice chair may meet maybe the Wednesday before that or earlier to help flesh out what the agenda should be for that meeting.
Okay, yep. Yep, okay. All right, so, and that gives you enough time, then, we have the agenda, we'll figure that out. Whatever day we meet, that you have enough time to do your work,
Yeah, we'll
so
meet
we're
it.
prepared at the meeting, so you're prepared for the meeting. And get information out to people, that
Yeah.
give them time to read and review things too, so.
Give everybody a couple days
we
to
have
read
it.
over things, right?
Yeah. Anybody else? Everybody good?
Yeah, I'd be interested in if we know as we consider a topic like the legislative, that if any of us have issues that we suspect we're going to want to introduce, to pitch them ahead of time so you're just aware. Might lead to separate offline meetings with regard to what do you mean by that, et cetera, so we don't have to bog down. I'll just give an example. This group right here, pretty significant group with regard to the implications of where it's going, and yet, best of my knowledge, we won't be presenting anything at the town meeting that's coming up. That's a big opportunity with regard to getting to the group that's going to be voting on the process whenever we get to that point. I find that to be a bit troublesome. There's a history in my time here with regard to town meeting votes that don't pass, and then they come up a second time and a third time where they eventually pass. I also think that's very problematic. So I just want to throw that out as something that I would love to hear how, in our discussion of legislative, how are we going to consider what I view as somewhat of a recent track record that suggests it's a challenge that should be considered in terms of how do we overcome it.
Anthony, you're shaking your head, you're nodding your head, you have something specific?
Oh, no, I'm agreeing. I think, we're so early in the process. We're not going to, I was just saying, sort of to respond to that, is I think on your question about town meeting, we're going to present some initial information. We're going to hear some feedback. I don't think it'll be the last meeting. We'll have a series of meetings on this topic, and it'll be good to hear exactly what you're saying so that we could then do some of this background research on this specific issue you're identifying to bring that back to the committee. So, I consider it iterative positive. What you're saying is exactly how we'd love it to work.
Could we then add something even for next meeting agenda, just talk about public communication, like how we might want to launch this publicly?
We can do that as part of the project
as
plan,
part-
maybe put a part in there, but yeah,
Okay.
it's a good point, though.
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Make it
if
very-
I may.
Yeah.
So, the warrant, so our next town meeting is in May, first week of May. So I think we can, typically, we'd have to go through the moderators in the room to get any business outside of, the warrants. We have to get approval through Tim to get, whether it's a 2-minute presentation, someone stands up and just says what's going on with the charter committee. Tim, I'll leave it to you, but that's kind of how it's more of just getting this information. Hey, by the way, this is going on right now. You have 9 residents in town that we've.
Could be a flyer, too.
Could do that as well, but I think town meeting, because that's the body that's going to be voting at the end of the day on this.
Yeah, well, generally, the philosophy has been that town meeting is the town's business meeting, and if it's not on the warrant, we're not going to deal with it. Over the years, we sometimes have had presentations from, let's say, the master plan committee at the conclusion of their project, when they had something to say, perhaps. I'm not saying this committee would have nothing to say by May, but it might be premature. And I think if you let one group have 2 minutes, then, the next town meeting, you got 3 people that want to show and tell at town meeting, and it gets unwieldy.
Okay, so that's a good kind of discussion we need to have when we're having the discussion,
the next couple of
okay?
weeks,
So good to bring it up,
Sure.
and this is how, so now we're getting a feel for how this is going to work, right? The kind of things we'll be discussing and so on, so it's
On
good.
the other hand, if there's a warrant article to hear a report from the charter committee on the progress, that's a different thing. Then you've got to deal with it because it's a warrant article, but,
Okay.
Otherwise, you're
I-
building a lot
I-
of time into the town
I
meeting
hear
before
you.
you
Absolutely.
really get down to business. you
Right,
know?
and we have a lot of communication methods, so.
Yeah.
But let's, let's,
Yeah.
We might be able to come up with something.
we might get creative. Okay, so are we ready to say, okay, so the plans, we meet in 2 weeks, so we've got to figure out who helps us get a room, and I guess we do that, or our clerk does that, or how do we do that?
That would be through my office.
Through your office, Lisa? We'll ask Lisa to get us a room and so on? Okay,
Yes, please.
okay. So we'll figure out getting the room, and as soon as we get that confirmed, we'll get something out to everybody, but we'll plan on 2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah.
6 o'clock, we were doing 6 o'clock, I guess, in case town people needed to not stay. Is that a good time for people? Do you like doing 6, or would you rather do later?
6 is good.
6 is good? Everybody else good?
Yeah.
I'd rather do earlier too, but
We're missing
I'm flexible.
somebody, right?
What's that?
We're missing somebody tonight?
Kevin, and
Oh.
Kevin, if
Gotcha.
for sure,
Sorry.
speak up, because I missed you over there, and I apologize for that. You're good
6
so
o'clock
far?
works well. 6
Okay.
o'clock works well for me.
Okay, we'll plan on 6. And in the meantime, we'll get together and get an agenda together and do all those things, and then we'll get through the first one, and then we'll figure it all out. Sound good? All right. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thanks, everybody.